Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be talking about eating. That's right, you probably hear about 1,000 different ways that we should be eating, how we should diet, what's good for us, what's bad for us. Sometimes what's bad for us becomes good for us. It's a very confusing world out there when it comes to the world of eating. Sometimes I always believe, let's just keep it simple. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is a two-time Emmy-winning investigative reporter for more than 18 years. She actually came into a little adversity when her mother and her aunt both got breast cancer. So she became a certified personal trainer and a running coach, which she also decided to have an aha moment where she began to change her diet as well. Today what we're going to be talking about is her new book, which is Eat Vegan on $4 a Day. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program our guest, Ms. Ellen Jap-Jones. Ellen, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Geez, Eat Vegan on $4 a day. Is it possible to even eat anything good for $4 a day?
Piece of carrot cake. In fact, I have carrot cake in the book. I have chocolate mousse in the book. I have a chocolate surprise cake in the book. And when I show the picture of the finished results of the chocolate surprise cake, nobody can ever guess what's in it. And then I go to the next slide that shows the ingredients, and people just start laughing hysterically. And I'm not going to tell you what's in it, but it's really delicious.
When you talk about desserts there, I remember a couple of years ago there was a friend of mine that she could actually make sugar-free desserts. And we invited her along to her wedding, and she ended up making little gift baskets for people who were interested if they wanted to take home and then have these desserts. And I was really astounded by just how good these desserts were. You couldn't tell there was no sugar in them. We're talking like chocolate pot de creme and the like. And I'm thinking, if it's possible for her to do this, why restaurants more often don't offer things like this? What's going on out there?
Well, it's really true, and I think more and more of them are just because there is such a demand. I am a columnist for our local newspaper just for fun, and I did a story recently on a barbecue place called Mr. Bones that now offers about 8 different vegan dishes just because Europeans kept coming in and saying, what do you mean there's no vegetarian or vegan restaurant between here and Sarasota? And so,
Europeans, there you go.
Exactly, and I'm finding this as I speak around the country. I'm speaking now at the largest vegetarian food festivals around the country. And thank you, Bill Clinton and Steve Wynn and a number of other celebrities who have gone vegan to save their health and realizing, like Bill Clinton on the eve of his daughter's wedding and, oh, by the way, his third heart bypass surgery, that he really would like to be around for the grandkids. And so a lot of people have epiphanies for health reasons and figure that it's a lot cheaper and a lot easier than having your chest cracked open for heart disease or having to spend your life dealing with the effects and medications of diabetes. And I just can't tell, for me, I was an investigative and consumer reporter, so I've been following food prices and the Consumer Price Index for decades. And as a 30-year vegan myself, for most of that time, I knew that not only was it possible, but it's not only the money you save at the grocery store, but it's the money that you save by avoiding these diseases. And when you consider that the cost of an average bypass surgery in the U.S. is about $100,000, and the resulting drugs that you have to take after the bypass, when you factor that into your $5 hamburger that you get at a restaurant, it's really more like a $100, $1,000 burger, depending how many of them you eat over the course of your life. I also worked at Smith Barney for 5 years after I left television, so what I just did for you is called dollar cost averaging. So I really hope that people start thinking about when you order food that is really potentially so destructive, it's more than just the cost of the food on your plate, it's what you pay at the hospital.
Absolutely, not to mention what you pay for and your energy, your mental focus, and the like. Now, here's what's really, kind of alarming. You take a look at this day and age with the economy. People are trying to find all kinds of ways to save money. And, of course, one of the first industries that really jumps on this bandwagon would be the fast food industry. And, again, I don't usually badmouth an industry that, basically gives people what they're actually wanting to buy. But in many ways, over the years, they've actually steered people in this direction. It's the result of fast food that caused us to have faster lifestyles, for instance. Now, you take a look at these dollar menus. Now you can get, 2 hamburgers or 2 cheeseburgers for $1, so people are really equating, geez, I can really eat here and I can, feel satisfied, on $1 and, maybe $2 or $3, whatever the case is. But, you got to take a look at the question of what you're consuming there, because it actually causes more hunger than it curbs.
Right, and there are so many hidden health problems, and I'm really not going to get into all of that, but
right.
You have to look no further than last night on ABC. They did a story on the pink slime that's being added to hamburgers. And
pink slime.
Yeah, I mean, just Google that on ABC and you'll see all you need to know. And when you look at that and what our government is not doing to protect us from these things, it's amazing that anybody, for example, would eat these kinds of foods. But my whole point is, what I found out when I was a financial consultant is that companies often didn't care about being socially responsible, for example, which was my particular focus and style of investing. But if you showed them how they could recycle not only their own company's cans, but other companies' cans as well, and then save money, all of a sudden they're really interested in saving the environment and being socially responsible. So my hope is that when you show people how cheap it is to eat vegan and how delicious it is at the same time, they're going to say, I don't care what you feed me. If you can do this on $4 a day, which, by the way, is about $2 a day less than the cost of food stamps, they're going to flock to the vegetarian and vegan table. And it really is amazing when people start eating this way. It takes about 3 weeks to change your taste buds, and all of a sudden they start feeling better. Now, I'll tell you, I usually place in 5K races for my age group. I ran my first marathon about 1.5 years ago. I'm just about to turn 60. I was the 5th oldest woman to finish this Palm Beaches marathon, and I felt like I could keep going after 26 miles. I mean, it's freaky almost how much energy you have and how great you feel. And all I can tell you, as a kid, I was sick all the time with upper respiratory issues and always on antibiotics for infections that were the result of these kinds of infections. So it's amazing how many people find their health improves. And, let's talk about weight. I had a woman in my cooking class who dropped 120 pounds in 8 months, never counting a calorie, never being hungry, and loving the food. She had a very fatal form of multiple myeloma. That was about 7 years ago, and she just contacted me on Facebook recently. She's doing great, still vegan. Her blood... Hello, are you there?
Yes, we still are.
Yeah, we had a power glitch.
I think what it was a killer eggplant came in, wanted something that it had to share with the audience. But anyway, as you were saying.
Well, they said that maybe it's the sunspots that they said we're going to have some issues with that. Whatever, but I'm glad you're back, and you know my number if we get disconnected.
Sure.
Anyway, it's just been a really interesting journey, not only with the breast cancer in my family, but everybody had heart disease, diabetes, arthritis, even things like varicose veins, which I was told for sure because of our family history I would be getting those. But when you're eating healthfully, when your arteries are clear, and you're able to exercise, I often get mistaken for 10 or 20 years younger than I actually am. So that's the other part of this equation.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's funny, when people decide, well, I kind of want to move in this direction, you can sense some frustration in them, like, what am I supposed to get? How am I supposed to go and approach this? Well, folks, that's what vegan cookbooks and the like are for. They're to show you how you move into this direction here. But, it's kind of funny because they always tend to lean toward, well, I'll start by eating salads, and then they kind of go with what they know, so to speak. So this is what an Eat Vegan on $4 a day book would really help them to do, is to let them explore possibilities they've never considered before.
Absolutely, and my book is very clear about, if you've never done this before, how you start, how do you cook beans. And your initial question is, how do you do this? My 10-second television answer is this: beans, greens, and grains. Now, the cheapest beans at Walmart are about $0.05 an ounce, and this is what I really stress in my talks. Look at that unit price, that little red box under the product. And for beans, the price of beans has hardly risen in 3 years that I've been tracking this. So $0.05 an ounce, that means a dime a serving. And then when you compare that to the cheapest form of hamburger meat, which is 30% fat and 70%, I don't know what else.
Well, exactly I don't know what else.
Right.
I stay away from that stuff.
At Walmart, that's about 60 to 70 cents for the cheapest form of hamburger meat. So
wow.
60 cents compared to a dime.
Right.
How cheap is it to be eating beans? And beans are full of fiber. I almost died of a colon blockage when I was 28 years old, same year my sister got breast cancer. And doctor said, honey, you better do something different with your life or you're going to end up like everybody else in your family. So that's why I research this. I certainly use my tools as an investigative reporter because, as we all are, we're all looking at this from the perspective of what's in it for me. How do I avoid this? And yes, you're right, there's so much information out there. But when you look at cultures of the world where they can't afford meat and dairy, they don't have any of our diseases of affluence. They may have diseases of poverty, but they don't have heart disease, cancer, and diabetes, the big ones. And we can't continue to pay for these diseases. Whether you pay for it, I pay for it, insurance companies pay for it, or the government, they are not sustainable at the rate that we've got them.
Now, talk about some other things. We've got beans covered here. What are some other, ways that people can go about beginning to shop that we can kind of give tips on right now on the program?
Well, as far as getting enough calories, beans and grains are going to be the most calorie-dense foods and also your best form of protein. Now, people always say to vegans, well, where do you get your protein if you're not eating meat and milk?
Oh, my goodness, there's a lot of ways.
The largest animals on the planet are vegan, and there's some very funny cartoons out there about that. But truly, and you go on this great website, another one called veganbodybuilding.com, and you see all these hunky guys and gals who are so bulked up. Now, I'm a runner. I don't want to be that bulked up. I don't spend a lot of hours every day or even every other day in a gym because I want to have lean muscle mass so that I can go fast when I run. But, vegans are, and there's so many pieces of research now coming in showing that we are much healthier than the average population. And it's really quite interesting to see how you do this. But there are many, many grains. People say, well, I don't like broccoli. Okay, here's the deal. There's 90 different fruits and vegetables. If you don't like one, you can pick another. And every time broccoli makes it on your plate, of course, it's a victory. There is a lot of protein and bioavailable calcium in dark green leafy vegetables, so that's another way you get your calcium. Again, vegans are shown to have pretty good rates of bone density, and not having to deal with osteoporosis is a huge part of vegans' health. Other ways to incorporate good foods into your diet and do it in a cheap way is to look for a local farm or a CSA, which stands for Community Sustainable Agriculture, and you can go on this great website called localharvest.org. That's localharvest.org, and you can find a local CSA near you, and often the food is organic, and if you volunteer there many times, they'll give you the food for free, which is very cool.
Mm-hmm. I think what's fascinating, too, Ellen, is that when you talk about CSAs, for instance, and local organic growing, is, I'm pretty blessed to be living in Portland, Oregon, which that has been huge for a long time. And as a result of organic, and that's one of those terms I wouldn't mind if you would kind of elaborate a little bit more on, because it was actually funny when I first quoted, it wasn't my particular quote, it was actually through a journalist a couple of years ago from the area that I live, and that was a term called green bashing. And that is simply that you see these companies that start planting sustainable and organic, all over their labels because that's what people really want, but really their practices aren't any different than they were before. But, with organic, for instance, it's what we've been experiencing around here is not only is it, getting more back to doing things naturally, but it starts to get less expensive as well because you can always reproduce. It's really quite interesting how all that works.
Right, and a trend that's really big here because our soil in Florida is only good for growing citrus and strawberries as you get further inland, but earth boxes, and you don't even need to buy one of those. You can just do it out of a recycle bin, put your own soil in it, and you can grow quite a lot if you don't mind growing something in a large plastic container. But there's just lots of different ways to do this so that you can save money. And, of course, the term, as you have said, it can kind of get muddied in the water. Now, back in the days when I was an investigative reporter, you had to comply with the Federal Trade Commission's rules, regulations, and laws about labeling, and these things had to be, in theory, had to be accurate. Is there the money out there for the organic police to be out there enforcing this? I think not. So the only way to know for sure is to go spend time at the farm and see what they're doing. And a lot of farms, I know this is a hot political football in our area, they don't pay for the certification because there are several issues surrounding that, but namely that it's expensive. So they may be growing organically even though they don't have the official certification. And the only way you know that is to go there and watch what they do, volunteer, and see what's happening and satisfy yourself.
Yeah, I know that about a year ago we produced a video. It was on the book entitled "The One Straw Revolution," and then he was a Japanese agricultural researcher, and he decided to just go out and, as he said, one day he looked out and he noticed that nature was perfect just the way it was, and learned to cooperate with it, just as it was. And so what he began doing was producing, and this was a guy, he's long since passed, but he began producing, for instance, rice yields in Japan that were exceeding all of the farming that were using chemicals and fertilizers and industrial-type practices. And his yields were meeting or exceeding those, just doing it naturally, the way you were supposed to. And one of his, stern rules were when he would go and he would sell to markets, is that you must sell my food less than, when it's organic, less than you would typically do. He says, because it's organic and it's something that you can produce over and over and over again, making it less and less expensive. And if he caught anybody saying, using a label, this is totally organic, and selling it for more, then he would actually just pull it away from the market. He says, I won't let you do that. And that's what's really interesting about this day and age. It's this attitude that you see with these whole food style markets, thinking because something is organic and sustainable and all these other things that they put on it, that it tends to be more when it actually should be less. Tell us how people can work around that as well.
Well, that is kind of a quirk of nature in our stores. I've always been fascinated ever since I started eating a high-fiber diet 30 years ago how brown rice would be more expensive than white because it takes more work to get the outer fiber of the rice grain off of itself than to just let it flow through the milling process without doing that. I mean, it's enough to make your head explode for sure. But, I have some tips in my book that talk about how you shop at the store because that's what most people are doing. And really, I got my prices by living on the floors of big box stores like Walmart and Costco over the past 3 years because I saw so many stories on the news that said you can't eat well on a budget, and I would see like these 300-pound women who said they were on food stamps loading up their carts with macaroni and cheese and Twinkies before Twinkies had its financial issue this year, and saying that this is the only thing they could afford. And since I've eaten this way for 30 years, I knew it wasn't true, and I just knew that as a reporter, just to be an alternative reporter's resource, to say, there's something better out there. And often, I would take pictures of the different food prices just so that I could keep track of it myself. And while I would be shooting in the frozen food section, I would see these same people were walking down the aisles, and I would just want to grab them and say, hey, there's a great deal on beans 2 aisles over. Follow me. But, there really is. It's just not. It's not rocket science. The recipes in my book are very simple. You don't need a dehydrator. It is very back to nature, and yet I have culled these recipes from the time when I was a single working mom and just wanted to get dinner on the table for my 3 kids cheaply and in a hurry. So, but one thing you do have to do is allow yourself to try new foods and flavors. And I think a lot of people are surprised when they find out how delicious these things are. One of the examples we use is if you ever drank whole milk and then you went to drinking skim milk, it looked kind of blue and slimy, kind of thin and disgusting. And then after about 3 weeks, you go back to drinking whole milk, and it's like, ooh, this is really sludgy and disgusting. And it's that way when you eat a plant-based diet. People are just sort of blown away by the color and variety. I mean, there's so much variety in the plant kingdom, and when you think about that compared to the animal kingdom, there's really not that much. And, of course, with all the videos that are out there now, and it's interesting that some states are moving to quash the legality of doing these undercover videos like I, as a television investigative reporter, used to do in some of these factory farms, because they don't want the truth out there. They don't want people to make that connection of how food gets on their table and some of the horrific ways that animals are treated. But of course, people have written entire books about those kinds of practices and issues. For me, it's been focused on health, because when I worked in the mainstream media, the only time PETA got any kind of coverage was when they did things that were very outrageous. And now that as the baby boomers are aging and they're going through these Bill Clinton epiphanies, like, wow, I want to be around for my grandkids, they are looking at health, and they are considering the kinds of things that many CEOs have realized, that even when you have the best medicine and the best doctors that money can buy, unless you change your dietary habits, these same conditions, the heart blockages, the diabetes, it's all going to come back or get worse within a year if you don't make some serious changes.
I couldn't agree with you more, Ellen, especially what you talked about here earlier in the program. As we've been broadcasting our program for more than 8 years now, we talk with a lot of people, obviously, beyond 50, sometimes earlier than that. One of the key things that you talked about earlier in the program about how it changed you is energy. And the beauty of energy, it isn't just about feeling more energetic, but you feel like doing more. You also think more clearly. Now, one of the things that I've really been sort of an advocate of is a lot of times we still seem to be caught in what I would call industrial-style thinking, and that is the idea that once we start approaching our 50s and 60s, we need to start considering retirement. In other words, it's saying you're no longer useful really in society, so go out and play golf or travel or whatever the case is. But we know what the reality of that is, financially speaking, is that many people just can't do that anymore, and so it scares them that time is beginning to run out. Maybe they haven't prepared, or circumstances have put them in situations, for instance, that won't allow them to do this. And I've been saying, look, most creative endeavors, when you really pay attention, we actually kicked off our program 8 years ago with a book called The Creative Age, which showed a very inspiring point of view of people that really became into their age of creativity and doing in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. So what I'd say to people is keep moving forward. Don't worry about that younger usefulness. Start focusing on how you can now apply your experience and your newly gained wisdom toward maybe even prosperity in your later years, but you must have the energy to be able to do it.
You're absolutely right, and you're nothing if you don't have your health. And believe me, where I live here in Southwest Florida, I see it on the beach daily. I run almost every morning on the beach, and people are like just staring at me like, who is this freak? And, in restaurants here, it's not uncommon to see certain restaurants that we go to, because there aren't any good vegan or vegetarian ones, but you'll see people in wheelchairs with the oxygen masks, and it's just very scary.
I've worked in restaurants like that, believe it or not. They're wheeling them in, and they would actually have ambulances coming to pick some of them up, and I was like, my goodness.
Yeah, you would think, connect the dots, like you would just think. And yet, for many people that I've met, much like myself, I'm the youngest of 3 daughters, and so I have had a lifetime to figure out what I want to do differently and how to do it. And it's been very confusing and difficult as you wade through the complex information. But we used to joke in hospitals when my sisters were there for their various procedures, like, well, what hospital wing are we paying for with this visit?
Right.
And then somebody from the endowment department would always make a visit because our family was golden. And after these surgeries that seemed to be life-saving, my relatives would think, yeah, well, we should donate money to the hospital because they saved our lives. And it's like, whoa, let's rewind the videotape here, It's just so different when you approach this in a preventative way, and when you just follow a few easy tips and pieces of advice that have really been consistent with the vegan doctors over the last 30 years. These are the folks that I've listened to and that I've come back to every time I see Atkins or a high-protein doctor on a talk show, or even the New York Times once wrote a piece called What If It Was a Big Fat Lie, and giving Atkins all this credence, which later was debunked again. And what I realized is that the science didn't change, but the marketing did.
Oh, of
and
course.
That's what you have to wade through is, what does somebody, and I say this in my book, what do they have to gain? What are they trying to sell you? Follow the money. And one of the things that often gets said about me is that I have nothing to sell. I'm just trying to, if I can save one person from avoiding the pain and suffering, both through experiencing and just witnessing what I've seen in my lifetime, then I feel like my life has been worthwhile. And you're right, I became a personal trainer. I'm a running coach. I'm a volunteer running coach for the girls cross country team at our local high school. I do all this because I want them to see that once you turn 50, it doesn't mean you're headed to the nursing home.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really fabulous experience. I would encourage your listeners to get involved any way they can with kids. I know with the kids who run at the schools, these really are the ones who are dedicated, and I can just tell are going to do something big with their lives because they have made, in a crazy world, they've made time to do something that they love and that keeps them physically fit. One of the girls this year, this is so cool, a senior, was going to be a lawyer, and she said, after spending time with you and listening to you and seeing you, I'm going to go into nutrition.
That's very encouraging. You bring up an area here that can be very sensitive, especially with this particular kind of subject for a lot of parents, and that is, well, you talk about eating vegan on $4 a day, and my kids they're just picky eaters, and I hear that, and it just kind of frustrates me sometimes. My kids are picky eaters, okay? My mother had raised 3 boys, including myself, and as a single mother, and she didn't make a whole lot of money in her early years. But I can remember we didn't have a whole lot of junk food in the house. We didn't have a lot of desserts after dinner. In fact, rarely did that ever occur. And one thing she always tended to have in the refrigerator were apples, oranges, carrots, celery, you name it. And I just simply say, well, I can't have that stuff in the house because my kids won't eat it. Well, I'll tell you what, they'll eat something rather than starve. So talk about how people can begin to change what's going on in their homes when it comes to these kids who, getting back to marketing, businesses and companies have been very astute about marketing too.
That's so tough. I often say that my kids really were well prepared until they got to kindergarten. And we would go on field trips, and we had an organic garden in our backyard, and we would go on these field trips, and the farmer would hold up this green leafy thing and say, "What is this?" And he was fully expecting, as most kids did, they would say spinach, and my kids would say kale. And they were right, because we had kale growing in our backyard. And I remember once when, the vegan doctors, every once in a while, they get some national press, and I remember one response a couple of years ago was, well, what do you expect, that our kids are going to give up milk and eat kale?
Right.
Actually, there's more calcium in kale than there is in milk. And, yeah, absolutely, they will, if that's what they are raised on, if that's what they get used to, and if those habits can be encouraged once they get to school, which sadly they aren't. But you just do the best you can. Food can be a real hotbed, a real battleground, especially in conflicted families. But wherever you can, and I have lots of recipes in the book that are designed with this in mind, where you get the kids helping to pick the food if you're growing it, or at least prepare it and throw it into a smoothie, even if it's something as simple as throwing the greens into the fruit smoothie or making dessert in a simple way, helping to prep with the vegetables, so that they understand how to use a knife, and that they understand that food doesn't come from the grocery store in a shrunk-wrapped box, that it is something that actually grows in the ground and is something you have to nurture and cultivate to get it looking beautiful and to make it healthy as well. But including kids in any way you can is so important if we are going to try and make any kind of dent on the obesity epidemic that has taken over the younger generations. One of the reasons I have done all this is because my parents were so sick and diseased by the time I had kids, they couldn't lift up my kids, let alone babysit them.
Oh, no.
And entire generations just lose. And you don't think about that when you're making these daily food choices. But 3 times a day or more, you get to vote with your pocketbook. And I hope that people will really consider what it is they're doing and the impact not only that they have on themselves, but the generations around them.
And what's even more amazing, too, because we've really featured diet and nutrition on our program for quite a long time in different ways, and that is that, you take a look out here, and I love to write a little story about my wife's father. He lives in Chicago, Illinois, just outside of Chicago, actually. And in his neighborhood, you look down the street, and all the houses pretty much look the same. All the front yards are nicely kept, nice green grass, except for his. He literally uses his front and backyard for growing. He loves gardening. And so this is what I remember, and I remember taking pictures of it, these large heads of kale,
yes.
and just what he had. And the diversity of the animals that he had around his house. And he loved trapping them. He'd trap them, and then he'd take them to a park and let them go. And, in fact, believe it or not, the first night I was there, I went to get out of the car, and he had an animal had been trapped on the side where I had went to get out of the car. And I said, "With that?" He goes, "Oh, I don't know. It's probably a skunk." And sure enough, the next day, that's exactly what it was. He had a skunk trapped in this cage. And I know this is a bit off the subject, but he went to take it, but I watched him the next morning feeding this thing, and, you think a skunk, he should have been blasted. He says, and he explained, no, really, this is how they do what they do. And I was amazed because he actually took that skunk out to the park, but that day was also my birthday, so they bought a birthday cake. So as they were transporting this skunk out to a park to let it go, it was in the back with my birthday cake. Interestingly enough. But the thing is that he, as he would always tell his daughter, what my wife is, he says, "Yeah, rose bushes, all that stuff looks really nice, but you can't eat it." And it was amazing how beautiful his yard looked with edible things.
Right. It's funny you say that because in my slideshow that I have been using all over the country when I talk about my book, which is Eat Vegan on $4 a day, just in case people are joining in, I have a picture of the nice front yard that's across the street from us, and then a neighbor's front yard, which has done exactly what you said. They've turned it into basically a farm. And I think municipalities are getting a little more lenient with this. They used to get I guess it depends where you are, they get kind of annoyed depending how unsightly they think that it looks. But, when you go back in history 100 or 200 years, that's what people were doing with their yards.
Right.
This whole grass thing is kind of a relatively new invention, and the chemicals that are used to make it look pristine or somebody's idea of picture perfect is just not really a good thing, especially with the runoff. And here where I live, we have lots of dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico with runoff from pesticides. And, again, where does this end? It's just time for people to rise up and say, look, enough. What are we doing to the future generations? And so many of these incidents happen in a big way, like the Gulf oil spill, which was right in front of our eyes. But these other spills of pesticides, you don't necessarily see that happening until you see the results. And it's going to take a lot of people getting together and electing more people like Dennis Kucinich who understand these kinds of issues and can really try and tackle them as a group. Because until more people like that get elected and understand and connect all these dots, we're going in a pretty sad direction. But until wherever it is we get to, I am really adamant about getting out there and trying to help people save money and save their life as well. I certainly see it as a personal trainer, how health can be so greatly and pretty quickly changed around if you make some of these simple changes.
And it certainly is pretty amazing. I can certainly encourage the listeners to know this, that when you're buying or moving in that direction of vegan, it's amazing how much you actually bring home for very little money.
Right, and it just doesn't take a lot, and especially when you start comparing the price of meat to the price of beans, and you also consider you get a whole lot more fiber in beans versus no fiber in meat. We're also the only species that drinks milk from another species. One of the things that I don't list often in my bio, but is right out there, is that I was a La Leche League leader for 6 years. For your listeners who don't know what that is, La Leche League has been around for decades as a sort of quiet but grassroots organization of mothers who help other mothers learn how to breastfeed. And often because we, especially many of us, grew up in a culture where breastfeeding wasn't successful, because the reality is we never saw other people doing it, so we didn't know how to do it. And that's what La Leche League formed. That was their purpose, was to help other mothers learn how to do this. So I was the one, I would take middle of the night calls from mothers saying, oh, my baby won't latch on, or I can't do this, and so I would run over there and help them. And the reason I did this, again, is because doctors said you better do something different. My one sister, who has now had breast cancer 3 times, breastfed each of her 4 children 6 months apiece. And that is actually the average age of weaning in the U.S., although it isn't the average age of weaning worldwide. It's something like 4 years. So in other places of the world, they're doing it much longer than we do in the U.S. But no other species needs to drink milk past the age of weaning. And the point is, with my family history, if I had a sister who was breastfeeding that long, I knew that I needed to do it a lot longer or do something different to figure this out. And now what's very cool is they know that breastfeeding is not only preventative against breast cancer in the mother, but it also is preventative in the female offspring. So you can go on the website, on the Breastfeeding Leche League website, and get all kinds of research and information if that's of interest. But the point is, again, we don't need milk past the age of weaning. And when you look at how baby cows are separated from their mothers, the baby cows are fed or killed for veal, and or just killed, and then the mother is artificially inseminated again to keep pregnant so that she keeps producing milk. And, of course, what happens, they give them bovine growth hormones. They get, as any breastfeeding mother will tell you, they get clogged milk ducts, and then they have to be given routinely antibiotics. And that clears up the infection, hopefully. And we wonder why there's so much MRSA. My other sister, who didn't have breast cancer 3 times, only once, got MRSA from routine herniated disc surgery in the hospital, flatlined on the table, almost died from it. She also had diabetes, which may have contributed. So these diseases are so interconnected, and we think, oh, it's just an isolated incident, or, one doesn't have something to do with the other. But they really are all diseases of inflammation and over-medication. And when we understand these kinds of connections, then perhaps we'll be able to start really getting at the root and the cause of the problem and not just treating it with a drug or a surgery.
Ellen, you bring up one more interesting point, and there are many that you can make on something like this. And again, I don't like to, wave the flag and go after anybody, but really what it comes down to is it's our personal choices that really fuel a lot of these things that occur. There's no doubt about that. And Suzanne Summers, when we had her on the program about 3 years ago, as she's really big about getting out there and showing more natural alternatives to treating and preventing cancer. And she says, what's really alarming is that cancer is turning into sort of a fashion statement, not her words, but that we're not becoming aware it's an epidemic. This was something that 20 years ago and even more, was something that maybe people got once in a great while. It was rare, but she says, now it's become the norm. And she says, that should be alarming people. I said, I couldn't agree with you more.
Right. And in my work as a cooking instructor for the national nonprofit, the Cancer Project, which is a spin-off group of Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine.
You sound like you have a lot of energy to do a lot of things.
Yeah, well, I did the cooking classes because...
Remember, she's almost 60, folks.
Piece of carrot cake. It was just so gratifying to do these kinds of cooking classes because you really would see results. Not that it was going out and curing cancer, but like the woman who came to my class with multiple myeloma, she'd been given up for dead. They really didn't expect her to live long, and she's still kicking 7 years down the line. It's just so there's no finer paycheck when you see those kinds of results. And you're right, cancer is just so accepted now that it's it's in our genes. Well, you're going to die of something kind of attitude. But there's a great book out there called Healthy Until 100 by John Robbins, and what I love about that book is just that in so many cultures of the world where they have naturally growing produce around them and they live mostly above 10,000 feet, so they're doing a lot of walking and not too much riding around in a car, let alone watching television, or they aren't tethered to electronic devices. They just go to sleep one day, live to 100, and just don't wake up. And that's a natural way to die and to live. And how you do that, it would be fun to go live in the mountains at 10,000 feet and in these cultures, but the reality is, how do we incorporate that into our everyday lives? And it may take some doing as people try and figure out how to get up out of the chair. I know so many of us are stuck in a computer chair or plugged into our devices electronically, but it really is important, even if you just set an alarm to get up out of the chair, to understand that you need to keep moving. And many studies now are coming in showing that. I heard this one guy that was interviewed over the weekend. He talked about, this is a doctor, talking about, he says, if you go run an hour every morning and then you sit at a computer desk the rest of the day, you've totally negated what you did in the morning. So those kinds of things are important, but also diet is as much an equation and a part of this equation as exercise. And so many runners that I have run with over the years have felt like, well, in fact, there's a T-shirt that says this: "I run so I can eat," and it's got ice cream cones all over the front of it. And the point is, you don't get an insurance policy just because you run, and there are a number of people who still have health issues and diseases and even die from sudden heart attacks while running because they weren't aware that they had these other medical issues going on that were strictly the result of what they ate.
Right. And it's quite amazing to realize that each and every one of us have the power in our own hands to change, but for a lot of us, as you mentioned earlier, it's a matter of having the motivation. Now, I think what would be really interesting, Ellen, and this is just a shot in the dark for you since you're an investigative reporter, is that you have Eat Vegan on $4 a day, and then maybe you can have a subtitle, or Choose to Live, and what it would cost somebody to actually live each day, nutritionally, medicationally, if that's even a word, for somebody to live in that paradigm, and say, what would you like to do with the difference?
Well, for some fun, and I actually have a slide in my slideshow when I talk around the country that shows this. There's a great website called IndiaHealthTours.com. And on this slide or on this website, you can see, because they do all the math for you, what it costs in the U.S. to have a heart bypass surgery. And they list all of the common surgeries, carotids, stents, everything you can imagine that has to do with your heart. And then what it costs in India, because they're trying to get you to come to India to have the surgery, because it's about a fourth of the cost of what it is in the U.S., which is just, hilarious. When you go on this website, you can click on the green button for a special promotional offer, which is just nuts. But, when you think about it like that, the cost of disease and what some of these procedures are going to either end up costing you or some insurance company, then it starts to be kind of a challenge to see. Every time I buy a pair of running shoes, which is about every 2 to 3 months or so, I go, cheaper than an MRI.
Right. Well, and you think of also the prescriptions that you have to take after such surgeries on the average as well. That's why I found that it'd be interesting. You've got Eat Vegan on $4 a day, and then you've got Or Live This Way for this much money per day. What would you do with the difference? It was just something that came to me. I don't.
There's and again, another slide in my show talks about the national poverty rate, which is about $23,000 a year for a family of 4. And 1 out of 6 Americans live at that level or below. So we're already there. If you do the math on that number, 22,000 divided by 4 people, and then you take a fourth of your income, which is what's supposed to be devoted to paying for food, that is about almost exactly $4 a day. So food stamps, like I said earlier, is about $6 a day on average in this country. So there's an extra $2 a day per person that we could be saving, and the savings nationally is just phenomenal when you think about if everybody had to go on a vegan diet. What's interesting is looking at statistics from during World War II when we didn't have access to meat and dairy, our health was actually much better, especially from a cardiovascular standpoint. And then once
people seem more hardy in those days as well.
Well, yeah, and the presidents were talking about victory gardens, which I wrote about in the original edition of my book. It got taken out for time reasons, but the victory gardens were suggested by, I believe, President Roosevelt to encourage people to grow their own, to save money, to save resources, so that they could use their money for other needed resources during that time. And if you talk to people who lived through that and had them, it was a pretty interesting way that if we're not careful, because what we're talking about is not only personal bankruptcies, which I've seen plenty of, both in my own family as well as outside of that, as a result of not being able to afford health care. We're headed in that direction again. And as many countries have to deal with a shrinking national budget and personal losses financially, and if you look at the statistics of the income disparity, where the 99% are really getting more poor and the 1% is getting richer, that whole dichotomy and dynamics will play out in a way that, as I sort of jokingly say sometimes, we may all be eating vegan in the future whether we want to or not.
Ah, there you go. Ellen Japp-Jones is our guest today here on the Beyond 50 radio program. Her book, Eat Vegan on $4 a Day. Ellen, go ahead and give out a website. People can find out more.
Yes, I'm at vegcoach.com, www.vegcoach.com. You can buy the book there, which I will autograph and send to you, or you can get it off of Amazon as well. It's my publisher's #1 seller. I think it's because it's about the economy and how to save money first and foremost, and also how to save not only your bottom line but your waistline as well. It's a great way to look at going forward, improving your health, and being around for the grandkids or whatever is important in your life, having energy to do anything that you want. So I'm also on Facebook with my book title, Eat Vegan on $4 a Day. I tell people that once you buy the book, it entitles you to a lifetime access to me on Facebook. And actually, you can get on Facebook without buying the book. But anyway, just, people are always asking questions, sharing recipes, comments. We try and keep it upbeat, funny, and positive, and just try and give people some ways to offer money-saving tips beyond and above the book.
Ellen, thank you so much for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. Always enjoyable to have conversations like this.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Thank you again. I want to thank you, listeners. Remember, the power is right there in your hands. All you have to do is just make a choice and see and reap the benefits of how that affects you. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to visit us at our website at beyond50radio.com, the number 50. We have a free weekly e-newsletter that comes out. We also archive this show as well so that you can listen at your convenience and share with others as well. Again, thanks for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. Remember, live your day past halfway.